Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. About 3 weeks ago on May 18th, the news broke that Chris Cornell, lead singer of Soundgarden as well as their primary songwriter, had passed away. It's a great loss for the world of music, and today I'd like to pay tribute as best I can by examining one of his most famous pieces, Black Hole Sun. It's a fascinating, intricate composition that's both disorienting and deeply moving, but how does it work? Well, first things first, the tuning on the song isn't normal. They seem to have tuned everything a little bit sharp. This adds an extra edge to it, making it feel slightly unnerving in a way that's hard to identify, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just gonna round to the nearest standard note name. Anyway, it starts like this. And the first thing we need to do is figure out which chords he's playing. At a glance, it looks like the chord changes twice per bar, so if we group those notes together, we get something a little more manageable. The first chord is what's called a sus chord, where the third degree has been replaced by the fourth, giving it a hanging, suspended feel. It's not clear yet whether we're in major or minor. Next we go to G minor, so it seems like our suspension has resolved, but then at the last second the guitar plays the fourth again, which leaves us still a little off balance even though we have our answer. Then he does this, and that's just fairly simple descending power chords. A power chord is when you've only got a root and a fifth. These notes are highly consonant, so it removes a lot of the complexity from your harmony and leaves you with a sense of openness and strength instead. The second one is a bit strange since we seem to be in G minor and there's no E natural in that key, but that gets explained quickly as we go to this, an E flat chord. The harmony is just sliding down a half step at a time. I like to break this chord into two parts. First there's these three notes, which are just a continuation of that power chord line from before, and then there's this note on top, which technically makes this another sus chord, but I don't think it really acts like one. Instead it goes here, and that strange note has just resolved up a half step. This leaves us on something like D7. This is what's called a dominant function chord, and it should point us back to G, but in order to do that it needs to use a leading tone, a note that sits a half step below the root of the key. In this case that should be F sharp, but there's no actual F sharp to be found here, so that directionality is weakened. It's still there, but it feels a bit hollow. From there we move into the verse, and I want to point out the rhythm because the guitar's doing something interesting here. He's not starting on the downbeat, he delays the line by a 16th note, which makes it feel a little disconnected. It also makes room for the melody, which starts near the end of the previous chord and ends right before the guitar begins. Moving the emphasis away from the downbeat is called syncopation, and it's a neat arrangement trick, but what's really interesting here is the chords. This first one is a G, a B, and an E, and normally that'd look like an E minor triad, but I don't think that's what it is here. I think it sounds more like a G chord with the E serving as an added note for decoration. Interestingly, it's a G major chord, whereas the intro was in G minor. We don't stay major for long though. The next chord is a G minor triad, which helps shift the modality back. The major chord can be viewed as what's called modal interchange, where a chord is borrowed from another scale to add some extra flavor. In this case, moving from the major version of the chord to the minor version creates a sort of bittersweet feeling, drawing a line between two different harmonic worlds. Anyway, from there we go to an F power chord, which helps establish us in G minor, then back to this, which is exactly the same notes as the thing we called G6 earlier, but this time the bass is playing in E, so it sounds more like E minor. This is another example of modal interchange, since E minor is the 6th chord in G major, and since its root is a half step below F, it sets up a descending bass line that continues as we move to E flat major, and then D sus4. E flat major is the flat 6th chord in G minor, so this line again juxtaposes the major and minor versions of the same chord like we did at the beginning. The D sus4 implies dominant function, but again it doesn't have the leading tone, so that resolution is dulled. Still though, it goes back to G6, then to this chord. I found a lot of different analyses for this, but all of them seemed wrong to me. I think it's an A flat diminished 7, and I say that fully aware that he's not playing an A flat, which would seem like a pretty good reason to dismiss that analysis. He is, however, singing one, and I think that name does the best job explaining what the chord's doing. You see, diminished 7s are highly unstable chords that really want to resolve, but they're not too picky about where. One of the things they can do is resolve to a major chord with the same root, and the next chord we see is this, which is clearly A flat major. This is another advanced harmonic device called a Neapolitan chord, but basically it has subdominant function, meaning it helps set up a dominant chord. Instead though, the verse repeats, so we don't really get much of a resolution here. After the second verse we go to the chorus, which starts with that chord from the intro that looked like an E-flat power chord with an added note. This goes to a D7, but again we omit the third to avoid a strong resolution. Then we go to a G power chord, then to this, which is a G power chord with an added flat 7, which serves as a passing tone in the bass to get us to this, where the guitar is playing a B-flat major triad while the bass plays an E-flat. Then we play these two chords again, and end with this, which is just more modal interchange with the 4 and 5 chords of G major. This D chord finally gives us a real leading tone which resolves back to the start of the verse. We play through all that again, but this time when we get to the end of the chorus, instead of the D major it does this, which is a B flat major, the flat 3 chord of G minor, but more importantly, a secondary dominant. This is a chord that wants to resolve somewhere other than the root of the key, in this case to an E flat chord, which helps set us up to go back to the start of the chorus for a second round. After that, we go into this section, which adds a D major back at the end. Instead of resolving though, this just repeats a couple times before diving into the guitar solo. And this isn't just any guitar solo. For starters, it's not over a chord progression, it's over a riff. Specifically, this riff. Okay, yes, there was a chord at the end, but it's mostly a riff. That chord, though, is interesting because it's actually 2 chords at once. If we look at the bottom 3 notes, we see what looks like an F power chord. If we look at the top 3 notes, though, we see a G major triad. This is what's called a polychord, where 2 different chords are played at the same time, and the dissonance that creates contributes to the chaotic feel of the solo. That chaos is also created by the rhythm, where an extra 8th note has been added to each bar. And finally, there's the solo itself, which uses a rapid, almost random-seeming improvisation to create a confusing, noisy feel that disorients the listener as it builds, before finally wrapping up with this, which is just a pair of power chords to re-establish the key before we return to the verse. And that's pretty much it. The last verse cuts out early and jumps straight into the chorus, and then the outro plays a couple of those sections again until it's ready to end. It's beautifully crafted, and it's just one of the many incredible songs Cornell is responsible for. In addition to Soundgarden, he worked with Audioslave, Temple of the Dog, and did his own solo stuff as well. He had a remarkable gift for making incredibly advanced harmonies sound simple and compelling, and he will be missed. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to Patreon patron Mark Yachnin for suggesting this song. If you'd like to see your favorite song analyzed, just head on over to Patreon and pledge at any level. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and keep on rockin'.